During the Second World War, there was a quiet kind of ingenuity that rarely gets highlighted in documentaries. Weapons and tanks always dominate the narrative, but the truth is that civilians, ordinary families, developed some of the most clever survival tools of the entire war. And one of those tools wasn't a weapon at all. It was a row of glass bottles, arranged with such precision that a single touch could alert an entire household. It didn't need electricity, didn't rely on a watchdog, and couldn't be jammed or sabotaged in the usual ways. It simply worked night after night in cramped apartments, basement shelters, boarded-up farmhouses, and improvised safe rooms. You're about to see how civilians turned the most ordinary object in their homes into an early warning system so sensitive that even a careful intruder had trouble crossing a threshold without giving themselves away. And by the end of this guide, you'll know exactly how they arranged it, why it worked so well, and how you can build and test a version of your own using nothing more than glass and gravity. So let's step directly into the details of a forgotten method that honestly deserves recognition not just as wartime improvisation, but as a legitimate zero-tech security system with, modern and practical use. The system worked because, glass tones create these really distinct disturbances. Civilians discovered early in the war that clusters of glass bottles produced distinct tones, depending on how they touched, collided, or shifted. This meant that when an intruder bumped into the arrangement, the resulting sound wasn't just random noise. It actually carried a signature that families could instantly recognize. A child opening a door gives off one kind of pattern, but a stranger trying to slip inside quietly produces a sharper, more abrupt chime. This tonal consistency is what gave the method its reliability. The war years forced people to interpret noise the way trained operators interpret Morse code. Every sound meant something. What made this effective indoors is that bottles resonate cleanly in confined spaces. But even outdoors, on porches, balconies, or entrances to small farm structures, the higher pitch cut through the ambient noise of night-time. People weren't trying to scare intruders away. They were trying to buy seconds. A second to wake up. A second to grab a child. A second to escape through a back way. In wartime, seconds meant survival. This wasn't a chaotic pile of glass. There were, consistent wartime patterns because certain arrangements increase sensitivity. The most common approach used 3 layers. First, civilians placed a stable base row of heavier bottles. Anything from milk bottles to thick wine bottles, close enough to touch but not so close that vibration carried through all of them at once. On top of that, a second row of lighter bottles was arranged perpendicular, creating what was effectively a glass grid. A final piece, often a single narrow-necked bottle or jar, was placed standing upright so that even a small shift would topple it. The trick was always, controlled instability. Too stable and no sound triggers. But if it's too unstable, even the wind or just footsteps from the household set it off. People tested their arrangement at night, then, tuned it over days, in much the same way you'd tune a lock mechanism. One woman in North London described, well, adjusting her bottle setup every evening until she could tell the exact difference between her husband's boots and the weight of an unknown step. That level of sensitivity didn't come from guesswork. It came from controlled alignment. Anyone replicating this system should build from those wartime principles rather than, simply stacking bottles. Start by choosing 3 types of bottles: 1 heavy and wide, 1 narrow and light, and 1 medium with a long neck. Place 2 or 3 heavy bottles in a tight line in front of the entry point. Balance the medium bottles across them, creating a slight forward lean so that, even a barely perceptible nudge causes shift. Then place the lightest bottle in a position where it must remain perfectly upright to stay silent. Once assembled, test it the way families did with the lights off. Approach the setup slowly and map out the distance at which motion begins to disturb the necked bottle. A finger tap or slight jostle should trigger the pattern. If not, well, the structure is too rigid. If it topples too easily, just widen the stance or, adjust the spacing by a few millimeters. This is really where modern testers gain a whole new appreciation for civilian wartime precision. They weren't working with fancy gadgets. They were relying on feel, weight, and honestly, the physics of sound. The system works today because, well, physics hasn't changed. For modern survivalists or off-grid homeowners, the same principles still hold true. You can actually line a shed door with glass bottles to detect animal intrusion. And, you can monitor a tent entrance during a camping trip in disputed territory or dense woodland. One of the most practical contemporary uses is to place a tuned bottle setup near a back door where, there's no electricity nearby. A single touch will cut through the night and wake you immediately. Anyone who has spent hours in remote cabins or long-term field shelters knows that sound discipline is security discipline. This method demands no batteries, no wiring, no maintenance, just understanding. Applying this technique gives you a direct line to wartime civilian resilience. One of the most valuable parts of studying history through survival practice is realizing that people weren't passive spectators to war. They solved problems with the materials they had and refined their solutions through daily use. Recreating their bottle trap gives you more than an alarm. It gives you a physical connection to their ingenuity. And once it's set and tested, you understand exactly why it lasted throughout the war. It's simple, it's dependable, and it respects the laws of sound and balance rather than fighting them. If you found this guide useful and want more historically grounded survival methods tested and explained in depth, make sure you subscribe to Warfield Survival and share this with someone who appreciates the practical brilliance of the past.